Welcome back, folks. Once again, you are listening to Financially Speaking. I am your host, Tony Zambri. It is my pleasure to be with you here today, and I hope that you are enjoying your time wherever you are, whether it be on the road traveling, in your house relaxing, or any other place that you may be listening to me. Just know that I appreciate you being with us. All right, when we cut to the break, we were talking about the Fed rate announcement today, which was no change as expected, and went over some comments that Chairman Powell made during his press conference. Again, I think all pretty much expected. Markets reacted pretty calmly, did pare back some of the earlier losses that we saw in the earlier part of the trading session. So I think that's good news. Certainly, there's been a lot going on this week in the technology side. We've had, Monday, a big sell-off in NASDAQ. Yesterday, a big rally. Today, another little bit of a decline, and a lot of it's due to some theoretical new Chinese artificial intelligence through a company called DeepSeek. It remains to be seen how valid this data is. I don't want to. I can't comment for certain on anything regarding it. I will say, generally speaking, we don't necessarily believe everything that is released by either China or companies within China, and for relatively good reason. On Monday, the markets reacted to this news as if it were documented and true. And yesterday rallied back some on the realization that it might not be. And I think going forward, it's worth keeping an eye on. I do think one of the things that it points out, though, is how important it is that the United States is actively engaged in AI. And listen, if you've listened to me, you know that I am very conflicted on artificial intelligence from a humanity standpoint. I have legitimate concerns about what this means for us as human beings out into the future. Having said that, you also know that I have mentioned that it is critical that the United States wins the AI race, if for nothing, no other reason at all, then the world's militaries are heavily invested in this, and it's simply something we can't afford to lose. So for that reason, and even if only for that reason, it's critical that the United States is on top of its game, that we win this AI race. And it's also a reason that AI is going to continue to grow into the future. From an investment standpoint, as much as it's exploded over the last couple of years, it is still in the infancy stages. It will continue to grow because there is no other choice. And I find this ironic because, again, as my first part of the statement was, I have concerns about this from a humanity standpoint and existentialism and stuff like that. But it seems like one way or the other, it's going to put us in a different spot. All right, I'm going to move on because I don't want to go down that mole hole or rabbit hole. So I'm going to move on to some interesting information that I came across while doing research for the show here today. According to Sentiment Trader, last Tuesday, the 21st, was the sixth straight day that more than 2/3 of the stocks in the S&P 500 finished higher. In the history of the S&P, dating back to 1928, that was the longest streak of days where at least 2 out of every 3 stocks in the index finished higher on the day. And that is an amazing stat. And again, speaks to what we've talked to repeatedly here, in that the S&P being cap weighted and controlled, I don't want to say controlled, driven by the largest companies within it. We've had some really great years in the S&P the last couple of years, but it's been narrow. It's been a handful of companies that have been leading the way. And so far this year, it hasn't been narrow. It's been 2/3 of the companies. I look at that as good news. This is truly fascinating. According to YCharts, the total U.S. stock market capitalization, as measured by the Wilshire 5000, recently ticked above $60 trillion. That is up almost 22 trillion, 21.9 trillion since the AI boom began on November 30th of 2022. So in just over 2 years, the U.S. stock market has gained almost $22 trillion in value, and it has nearly doubled since the start of this decade, the 2020s, and tripled almost from the 21.6 trillion that it was at 10 years ago. So incredible growth that we have seen in the last 2 years, the last 5 years, and the last 10 years. With all that good news, here's a little cautionary note. According to Guru Focus, the Buffett indicator, the Warren Buffett indicator, is the ratio of a country's stock market capitalization to its GDP, gross domestic product. That stood at a record 210% for U.S. stocks as of the 23rd of January, again using the Wilshire 5000 as a measuring stick. In a 2001 Fortune article, Warren Buffett noted that if the ratio approaches 200%, you are quote unquote playing with fire, and now we're at 210. So certainly things have changed in the last 24 years, and maybe Mr. Buffett would have expanded that ratio somewhat to account for the increased multiples that people are willing to pay for the growth that we have seen. However, it is worth noting that we are standing at record market caps to GDP. So we either need GDP to increase, or we might be looking at a little bit of a pullback in markets at some point in the not too distant future. Man, this is fascinating. According to the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, the $20.9 trillion combined value of the 10 largest U.S. companies now represents more than 70% of the U.S. GDP. 10 companies, market capitalization, 10 companies represents more than 70% of the U.S. GDP. And oh, by the way, it's now larger than China's $19.5 trillion economy, as well as the GDP of the world's next 5 biggest economies combined: Germany, Japan, India, the UK, and France. 10 companies. 10 companies. So when we talk about how narrow the growth has been within U.S. markets recently, 10 companies. Just amazing stuff. Bird flu outbreak halted all poultry activities in Georgia in mid-January. This according to the USDA. That sent wholesale egg prices soaring to more than $6 a dozen across the country. In today's Newsday, there was an article with a picture showing a dozen eggs here on the island at over $9. Now, this is an example of why we have to be careful when we look at inflation numbers every single month, right? Do we think that what the Fed does with interest rates is going to affect the price of eggs due to a bird flu outbreak? I hope not, right? The Fed, one has nothing to do with the other. So there are going to be things that happen that will help or harm inflation that are completely out of the purview of what the Fed does. And we just need to understand that, come to grips with it, and accept it. And I think the Fed kind of has. You know, they're no longer just harping repeatedly on we have to get to 2, we have to get to 2. Instead, they'll say things like they did today. Remains slightly elevated. All right. Music is playing. That means we're coming to the end of the show, folks. I cannot believe it. I thank you for spending the last half hour of your lives with me. Once again, you have been listening to Financially Speaking. I am your host, Tony Zambri. I am Managing Director, Financial Advisor with Zambri Financial, powered by LPL. Please go to our website, zambrifinancial.lpl.com. If you do, I promise that I will get back to you. And please, until next week, be well and God bless.
The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this station, JVC Broadcasting Management, or its sponsors.